So the next exercise I'm going to do, the sixth in the series, is actually a two-parter. The first part is about stretching and opening up the spine, pretty much from the lumbar spine up to the thoracic spine. Okay. So both sections of those. The second part actually opens up the pelvis and the lumbar spine. So both are important for good natural movement, as well as maintaining the mobility, so as not to hurt your back during certain exercises within the internal martial arts. Okay. So one thing, there's a lot of twisting and stuff in particularly Baguazhang. And when that is done, and is done properly with the proper strength and mobility, there's no risk of injury. But a lot of times what happens is, since people lack mobility in the thoracic spine or in the pelvis, that transfers twisting over into the lumbar spine, which in a sense needs to make up for the lack of that motion in places where it's supposed to have it. When that's the case, what typically will occur is injury in the lumbar spine, because just the way that the lumbar spine is developed, it's not meant to have an excessive amount of rotation and torque, and which would lead to shearing of the lumbar discs. So by this fashion, what we want to focus on is making sure that we're able to provide the necessary mobility in the proper areas. And if I didn't clarify mobility is actually the ability to maintain strength through a natural but greater range of motion. So that's kind of an important aspect. When mobility is not maintained, it generally leads to restricted movement and the possibility of injury in the near or distant future. Okay. So here's the movement. So there's the movement for you. Now, with that movement, it's important to understand that it is necessary to have a proper hip hinge. So here's what a hip hinge is. A hip hinge is where I focus on hinging at my hips, as opposed to hinging at my low back, my lumbar spine. Okay? So common thing that you see in most people is when they go to do sound push up, is they bend here at the lumbar spine, a little bit into the lower thoracic spine. We call that the thoracolumbar junction. Thoracolumbar junction is the junction point as the thoracic spine transitions into the lumbar spine. Any time where you have a transitional area of the spine, it does tend to be a little bit weaker, because the segments, the vertebrae, are essentially in transition. So they're very similar to the ones above it and a little bit to below it. This does tend to lead to a little bit of weakness. So what I commonly see is chiropractor working with the population, is that these segments tend to become very injury prone, especially when people don't maintain good structure and function. So as you're doing the hip hinge, what you want to focus on is maintaining good strength, maintaining natural position with the lumbar spine, so it's natural, it's neutral. Okay? That curve is there for a reason. It's meant to be there. It's a very strong curve. Now, commonly in the Chinese internal martial arts, particularly in Taiji Quan, is that people will round the lumbar spine. Well, they'll reverse the lordotic curvature. So you end up, and they do this by tucking the hips. So you commonly see this tuck, and this rotation of tuck takes that curve out. When you take that curve out, what happens is it actually places a great deal of pressure on the end plates of the vertebral bodies, and it also weakens and causes issues with the ligamentum flavum, which is a very long ligament inside the spinal canal. When you change all this stuff and you don't allow for the natural structure and function of these tissues and structures, they will cause weakness, possibly prone to injury. And you also another thing is you also deactivate the erector spinae, the paraspinal muscles that will run along the spine, that are actually meant to maintain balance and maintain the strength of the spine. Okay, so it's important to understand why this movement is so necessary for the back. Okay, so here's what I want you to focus on to get this movement is focusing on that hip hinge. Okay, now I'm going to maintain balance here in my pelvis. So you may want to try this as a basic exercise. Find what is pelvic neutral for you. Okay? So you'll thrust your hips forward, you'll thrust your hips back, forward, and back. I know it looks a little awkward, okay? But it's necessary to kind of find that balance in between them. Once you do find that balance, you're going to maintain that balance the entire time. So what I want you to do is you can put your hands on your hips right at that crease spot, okay? The Kwa in Chinese. Okay? And you're going to push your pelvis back as you maintain your spine. It is almost as if your spine is completely rigid, that it could not bend up on itself. Okay? Now the other helpful tip is to imagine that I have a bar running from here to here through my hips, and as I do that, it's able to maintain that movement. So I'm just kind of going back and forth on that movement. Some of my daughter's toy figurines, as they bend and stuff like that, have a similar idea that you can bend them and they only bend at that part because they're completely rigid in that torso area. So it's a very similar idea.